Okay, so we're going to be doing lesson 10, which is out of chapter 15. Not chapter 10, but chapter 15 on the third declension nouns. And this is the only thing we're going to be covering. So, I guess just a background. You know nouns, right?
Should know nouns.
You should know nouns, yeah.
Know nouns. Generally, yes.
Well, if you look at page, where is it? 107, under 15.5. This is the very first sentence. It says, up to this point in your study, the world of Greek noun has been relatively uncomplicated. With a few exceptions, it was an easy matter to determine the declension and gender of the noun. With the introduction of the third declension, the waters of the Greek noun have been muddied a bit. So, this is probably the hardest thing to learn. And the main reason why is if you look at the vocabulary list right here, you have liquid stems, you have mute stems, you have vowel stems, and you have neuter nouns. And they all can do different perform differently, or in how they look. And really there's more than 30 paradigms that you would need to know if you were to memorize it all, step by step. But the main thing we're going to do today is look at it from a lesson standpoint, or not a recognition standpoint. So we don't need to know every single paradigm there is. Because each word can do different things depending on if it ends with a consonant, ends with a vowel, you name it. But yeah. So just to kind of do a review of what we've learned so far, we had the second declension nouns, which if you look at the masculine, feminine, singular, it starts off with as, u, o, on. Let me just do this. Here we go. As, u, o, on. On, u, o, on. The little stars right here basically say it's the same thing as the masculine, feminine. And then the plural is oi, on, ois, us. A, on, ois, us. So yeah. Pretty easy, right? Pretty simple. So it's kind of important to recognize that the nominative here is the Omicron sigma at the end, because that's going to start muddying the waters right there. This is the first declension up here on the top in the gray table. This was a little bit difficult because depending on endings, if it ended with the epsilon, iota, rho, it had the alpha. If it ended with sigma or a sibilant sounding, the nominative and the accusative had the alpha, but the genitive and the dative had the eta. If you can see the eta is right there. And then anything else, well, it had the eta. So primarily, if you look at the first declension, it is considered the alpha stem because the alpha is more dominant. And the second declension would be the Omicron stem because the Omicron is more dominant. So yeah, any questions on that? No? Okay. So the most important thing to know and even get to at this point in time is the article. Because the article here, as you know, it's not based off declension. It's just has the masculine ones, has the feminine ones, has the neuter ones, and they have the same, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. And I believe that there is no vocative article. If there is one, I think it's the same as nominative. But the thing to note is because this doesn't change, it's really good to know the article because most nouns do not appear in a vacuum. In other words, they're not by themselves. What they're going to have is an article next to them. So you can easily tell if a noun is masculine based off of the article, besides the genitive. Genitive can be a little confusing. and the neuter and the masculine genitive dative can be kind of look similar too, but at least you could tell if it's feminine or masculine for sure. And that's really going to be helpful for today's lesson because a third declension noun can be all three genders. Yeah. So straight from the book. Thus far we have kind of what we just kind of went over. Thus far we have presented the first and second declension of the Greek nouns. First declension nouns are mostly feminine, with a few masculine. This declension is often called the alpha stem declension because of the alpha sound predominates in the endings. Second declension nouns are mostly masculine and neuter with a few feminine. It is often called the omicron stem because of the omicron sound predominates that. So both the first and the second declensions of the stem of a noun is derived from the nominative singular. And this is where it gets a little tricky because third declension is you not only need to know the nominative, but you also need to know the genitive, which we'll get to that. Yeah. Again, the third declension includes nouns of all genders. So it's not just primarily masculine, not just primarily feminine, but all genders. And there's a pretty good variety of stems to follow. The stem of the third declension noun is derived not from the nominative singular, but from the genitive singular by removing the ending, which is usually the omicron sigma os. For this reason, both the nominative and the genitive singular forms of third declension nouns will be given in the vocabulary list. And honestly, if you look at your vocabulary list, if you look at page 1 or 2 at the top, you'll see the nominative is the very first one on the left. Then the one right after that is the genitive. Then you have the article. So that's going to tell you if it's feminine, and is the article right there. And then you have the definite or a gloss, which is for the first one on 102 is anastasis or cis, which would be the nominative. Anastaseos would be the genitive, and you have the a, or hey, which is the article, and resurrection is the kind of the gloss meaning behind it. So the best way to put it is, if you want to know the third declension nouns, you need to know all that information right there. Because the article is going to tell you the gender. You need to know the genitive, mainly because when we look at the stems, all the other case endings besides the nominative is built off of the genitive. I'll show you that later. You have a question?
Not a question, just I think clarify.
Yeah.
So the endings for these, like, pretty much uniform down the line under each one. The genitives are going to be the same because it's based off that.
Yes.
So the nominative might look different, whereas with other ones, okay, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. I think the hard part is when you look at a lexicon or a dictionary, it's not going to have the genitive. It's only going to have the nominative.
Yeah.
So it's kind of good to have a grammar because they usually give both.
Yeah.
So yeah. So like I said, it's best to learn both forms along with the article as part of your vocabulary study because you cannot always determine the gender of a third declension noun just by looking at it, especially in its nominative singular form. So third declension nouns. Although you will encounter spelling changes in the stem, these are the basic third declension endings. You have a sigma for the nominative, or it could be none. You have, and this is, by the way, masculine and feminine right here. And this is on page 103 under 15.3. The genitive has an omicron and a sigma for os, singular. And then the dative would be a iota, and the accusative right here would be a alpha or a nu. And I'm not really worried about the vocative. It doesn't happen that often. Whereas plural would be epsilon and a sigma. So S, the plural genitive. Now, if you look at the genitive here, it's own. Now, if you look at the genitive in the other declensions, you're going to see own. But besides the, own all the way. So, first declension plural's genitive is own, and second declension plural genitive is own. So there you go. So own is pretty popular. That's kind of giveaway for genitive plural. And the dative plural would be a sigma iota, and sometimes with a movable nu. So that'd be si or sin. And then lastly, in the accusative, it would be alpha sigma. So, well, I guess I'll look at the neuter real fast. You'll notice that the really main difference is that the nominative for a neuter is going to be none all the time, and the accusative is going to be none all the time. And the only difference between the plural neuter and the masculine feminine neuter, or plural, is the nominative and the accusative are both alpha. So besides that, the main thing I would like to be memorizing is this masculine feminine paradigm chart. There's songs on it on YouTube. There's many things, but one thing I thought of that was helpful is making this right here as a name. So siya, and then you have is, kind of like is, owning her sin, and you have this looks like as right here, and I do as soon as possible, ASAP. So sosia is owning her sin as soon as possible. So even though it's kind of blending in that right there, just kind of distinguished. This is one way you can kind of help memorize it. But you have the sigma, you have the omicron, sigma right there, the iota, and the alpha. So I just say, and alpha is usually the pretty much predominant, I believe. So sosia, and kind of poetic device right here, is owning. So you have the when you look at owning, it's going to have the own sound to it, and the owning kind of way to help it. And sin, like I showed you, and os is ASAP. Pretty cool. Any questions on that?
At least.
Okay. So that's on page 103, and I do recommend either looking up a song or at least memorizing something that will help you memorize it. There's many other ways you can do it. You can make your own. You can make something for each one of these, which people have done. But I think sosia seems pretty easy to remember if you imagine as a name. Okay. Now, in the dative plural, you'll notice that there's the sigma. Yes, there's possible sigma in the nominative, but this really pops up because it's not the final sigma in the dative. So this it's kind of like the future, what we learned in the future. You have these right here, which are the labials, or the things that the sounds that the letters that you have to use your lips to make the sound. So p, b, f. And so that with a sigma turns into a ps for a psi. Well, the iota right here just tags along. It just follows along. So really the only thing changing here is the sigma. So same thing as the future. You have the gutturals, or the things that happen in the back of your throat. You have the kappa, gamma, chi. When they go together, it's a xi. So again, the sigma changes into a, and the iota tags along. And then, again, same as the future, the dental ones, the ones that you have to use your teeth to pronounce the sound, the tau, delta, and the theta. they just drop out, just leaving the C. There are other changes to keep in mind of, and that is usually when there is a nu at the end, or nu and tau at the end of a stem. And usually that just completely, the nu or the nu tau drops out altogether, leaving the C. Any questions on that? Main thing is if you see a nu, it drops out. And if you see a tau, it drops out. And then you primarily just, really the best way to memorize it is try to pronounce these consonants. If it's something that you have to use your lips to pronounce, then it's going to be a C. If it's something that you use the back of your mouth to pronounce, it's going to be a Z. And if it's something that you use your teeth to pronounce, it's going to be just a dropout. They go bye-bye. Yep. And really the exception to that is the nu just drops out too. Okay. So if you look on page 105 and through 107, you'll see a whole bunch of really paradigms of certain words. And if you look at 15.4, it actually says, become familiar with the following paradigms, which are representative of the patterns for the third declension nouns. The vocative forms are not given because they are usually the same as the nominative. This section presents examples for liquid and mute consonant stems, vowel stems, and neuter nouns. And when it's saying liquid and mute, it's just talking about the ending of the words. And that liquid be like a nu or row, something that you can make, kind of rolls off your tongue sound. Mute is something that kind of like stops, like like the dental ones. So you have the like a data, tau. They just those are the ones that kind of drop out. And then the vowel stems are anything that really ends with a vowel. There's some changes that happen with vowels. And then you have the neuter, which is on 107, page 107, number 4, and that just has its own thing. But for the purpose of this lesson, I think using this example right here is probably the most helpful, because if you just know the Sosia is owning her sin as soon as possible, and just remember that the nominative can be none. So you don't have any sigma there, so it's going to be a none. But you have the os, you have the iota, and you have the alpha. See it? And then you have the s, own, sin, and os. This really follows after every single one, and just remember the rules of, like the sigma, and that changes everything too. So, yeah. So pater is father, and yeah. Any questions on that?
Yes. Question. Looking at the vocab, there's the liquid, mute, vowel, and neuter. And then when we went over the endings, there was the masculine, feminine, and the neuter. Are these neuter ones the only ones that take those endings? Basically?
Yes.
Okay. So all the rest, the liquid, the mute, the vowel will all take the masculine, feminine endings. Yeah.
So when I say that the third declension can take all genders, each word still has its own assigned gender, and that's what the article's there to represent. Okay. They just don't take multiple forms. It's just adjectives are the only thing that takes multiple forms. But neuters, because they usually have the alpha.
That's right. Yeah, like
at the end of the plural.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the key. But really, if you're looking at the word, like if you look at the neuter noun on 102, ima,
Mm-hmm.
just by looking at it, you're not going to know what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to like know your articles. That's going to help you out.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
Or know the word. So even if you have this this paradigm, Asosia is owning her sin as soon as possible, it's not going to really help you identify the word. It's just here to help. It's just there to help you recognize what case it is in, basically.
But
Okay.
you still need to know the articles to know the gender
Yep.
of the specific one, and then that can help you know which endings it's going to take.
Correct.
Generally, okay.
Generally, yep. So if you see an article, that's again like nouns don't appear out of nowhere. They usually are with something,
Right.
and that's usually a key for that. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I need to go through all of these examples. I mean, I can if you want, but I actually, sure, why not? Let's look at the under number 1, the very first example on 105, you have LPs, which is in the nominative case, singular, but then you'll see L P'd os. And that's probably something I need to make clear. And this is an agenitive. Can you read the delta
Mm-hmm.
right there? That's a delta. I'll make that. So the genitive right here, the LP'd, is the stem. So it's kind of like the aorist. It's the root of the word. So that is how you find the root. So everything, all these paradigms right here, you have the genitive, dative, accusative, all, even nominative, all are built off of this stem right here. The only thing is the nominative singular changes a little bit, but everything else is built off of that stem. And all the rules that we just talked about, where changes happen, if there's a dental, you'll notice that in the plural dative it drops out. So instead of L P sin, it's a signal right there, but instead of LP, it's hard to pronounce that together. Alpidsin. Well, it's Alpicin. So because the dental stuff and the sigmas just don't really flow together. It's kind of like speaking Spanish. Like I said before, they speak really fast, and it just doesn't go together. So a lot of the way language works and the way the words appear, you have to think it from a phonological standpoint. How they are sound is how they're going to be really spelled in Greek. If you can't put 2 to 2 together easily, then it's probably not going to be that, basically. So yeah. Any questions on that? But it is important to know that the stem. Yeah. So that's really the third declension nouns. I recommend just looking at page 105 through 107, just recognizing how these things form. But really, if you know Sosia is owning her sin as soon as possible, that really helps clear out what case it is in, for the most part. Again, there are irregulars throughout this, like there is in any other thing, like Sabbath, for example. Sabbath actually goes into multiple declensions. Like the dative singular is sabbato, which is a second declension. But the plural is actually third declension, sabbatin. Anyway, I don't know how to spell that off the top of my head, but otherwise I write it down. They're just irregulars that you have to just know and just come across, but those are just something that as you're going through your devotions, going through your time in the New Testament or Old Testament in the Greek, it's just something that you will come across, and I just recommend for the first 5 years or so, just having some help. Yeah, because you're going to need help. It takes about 5 years to actually get fluent in the language. But there's one thing I did want to cover, so if you look on this vocabulary list, especially the third declension noun vocabulary list, so if you look on your handout, it's on the back side at the bottom. But there's a couple ways to kind of help you recognize words, maybe help you in the sense of memorizing them. So this is called Grimm's Law. Basically what Grimm's Law says is that all languages are grouped in families. And because they are grouped in families, those within the family can form cognates through other languages, which I'm going to show you an example here. So the idea is that Greek is a sister language of English, or English is a sister language of Greek, however you want to look at it. But because we all came together. And really it's from Indo-European family language. So things that are part of that is you have Greek, you have Italic, which you have Germanic, Celtic, Armenian, and so on and so forth. And then those branch out. And really, English comes from the German line. And so on and so forth. But in Greek, they have East and West Greek, and that just keeps breaking out into even more stuff. And eventually you have gets to the Koine Greek, and then you have what is today known as Modern Greek. But it's all built off of that. But there, at one point in time, there's divide. But anyway, all these right here are related into what is called Indo-European language. And if that is true, then there's probably going to be similarities in the language. And what this guy did, I think his name is Jacob Grimm, is, I'll just do this. He saw that it was a consonant. The consonants acted as a skeleton for a lot of words. Now, when I am saying this or presenting this, we have to keep in mind that time since Babylon, Tower of Babel, is great. So there's going to be words that will not be cognated. In other words, there's similarities. And there's going to be words that are what's derived from instead of being cognated. So like words like ethnic, for example, in English, from ethnos. This doesn't mean that they are, is it cognate? It just means it's derived from that word. Because not all languages had every single word and just built off and grew from there. And then some words are just new, like computer. You know, you're not going to have that word in Greek and back in the day. So let's look at this. So labials, remember what the labials are? The ones that you pronounce with your mouth? Lip sounding. So p. So you have a pay. And that's going to be voiceless. B. That's going to be voiced. I mean, it would be one that's more like a liquid. I guess I'm saying it would be more of a like f. So the f right there. Or it can also look like this. But and then the dentals are the tau, the delta, and the theta. Because when you pronounce those, you need your teeth to pronounce those. Then you have the palatal, or the palate, the things that have in the back, or sometimes called guttural. So the kappa, gamma, and the chi, or this is actually can also be a chi. So it's kind of an aspirated G or K sound. And so yeah, these are these. And so just keep those in mind. Generally, if we follow this order right here, all the way through. So just use our word that we saw earlier. Pater, for father, right? Well, the P can go into like a F sounding, which is what this sounds like. And the T can go into a th. See the direction that's going in?
Oh.
So it have like a th sound.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you put this together, and the vowels just change in general, but you have father.
That is very interesting.
Have you ever heard that?
I have not. That is really interesting.
Yeah. We can do. Let's do. Oops. Cardia. So, kappa is going to go that way, right? Well, English, they don't like the more guttural, so it actually smooths out into a H sound. Then the delta is going to go into the T sound, right? So you have, it's kind of like heart, but it's in English we spell heart, and then this drops off because that's just ending.
Cardia, yeah.
Yeah.
So we get cardiovascular.
Yep, cardiovascular. Yep.
Heart.
Yep. What's another one? There's a whole bunch. I mean, this happens in multiple different ways. If you want to do teeth, or tooth, I should say. So in Greek, it's odous, and you're like, okay, we have an omicron at the end, but you have to remember vowels kind of do weird things. This one, the delta, turns into a T sounding. And the problem is this would be a word that's actually built off of a stem. So this would be the sigma right here at the end. So the stem would be odont. The NT, or new tau, drops off. So the tau here turns into a what? The sound, right? So you have the T, and if you keep the oo sound, tooth. So this is something that kind of helps learning vocabulary words, especially at the third declension. They seem to really follow this a lot. Like if you want to do mother, which is may tear. Well, the M's going to stay and the R sound's going to stay, but what changes right here is the tau goes into the th sound. So, and the vowels, they're generally going to follow. So if you look at vowels, they're going to follow the classification. So there's A vowels, O vowels, and I vowels, and maybe E vowels. But they usually follow, but it'll be mother. So really, the only thing that's changing is the vowels, and then the way the consonants just change. So a lot of languages, Latin, German, you name it, Armenian, they are all interrelated because they're one family, and all the consonants are really a skeletal letter. So if you know the consonants, yeah. But again, you have to remember times happen. This is not for every word, because not every word has been there from the beginning. But this does happen to at least 1/4 of the words.
Look at like pistos.
Yeah, pistos. That's one I was.
That's like. It's weird that I've never even seen that.
But in the noun one is really where it's at. So pistis. Oops. Maybe it's final sigma. So the P turns into a F sound, and the T turns into or tau turns into a th sound, and the vowels, whatever, change, but you have faith. Yep. You can do it with a lot of words, that's for sure, especially third declension. So it's just there to kind of help recognize some of these words. It's called the Grimm's Law. Again, it's all based off phonology, how the letters sound. And this actually brings up kind of like a background question. It's like, okay, Tower of Babel. When God changed the languages, did he change them into families, and then they broke off as they went and moved everywhere? And that's why these families are similar? Or did he change them to where pater and father happened to be at one point in time? That's what made them confused, because the P sounded like an F and the tau sounded like a th. Make sense? So, like, how did that actually happen?
What is your view on that?
I don't know. I would assume it was just it's families, and from there it kind of branched out.
That would be my guess too, because when we think of like
there's
Asian languages and stuff that. I haven't studied them, but I'm guessing they have very little in common.
There's about 30 different languages, or family of languages. You have Semitic, you have European, Indonesian, or not Indonesian, but whatever.
But like
Asian.
I mean, like Chinese symbols and stuff have nothing to do with,
Well,
as
I know.
far as I know.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
Like nothing to do with any of this, but.
Yeah. So, like a Semitic would be, Aramaic, Hebrew, all those things like that. But so when you look at it, it's like, wow, these are really all related.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it's just kind of like spread out, and then you have these different dialects, and they start pronouncing things a little differently. I don't know. It's just an idea. But anyway, so vocabulary. So I'm going to do something new for the next quiz. I understand that everyone is bogged down, and they do not. You guys don't have it all down, because it's a lot of information within 14 weeks, and we're on chapter 15, and we're not even done with 14 weeks yet. We've been doing 2 chapters at a time on some cases. So what I'm going to do, instead of saying, hey, you need to know the vocabulary, I'm just saying, bring your vocabulary with you. And it's actually a good time to do that, because you kind of have to know your third declension noun vocabulary to know what gender it is. And that's just a lot of work in terms of translating. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to find a verb, and I'm going to ask it to be parsed instead. So just practice those verb paradigms, which, since y'all are not on here, they're not here, most of you, you don't have the most recent handout, so I'll try to email that out. As far as homework is concerned, 4, 6, 7, and 11. 4, 6, 7, and 11. And I just wanted to show how important the articles are. So you have this word right here, anastasis. Well, it's a third declension noun. And you have a sigma there, but you really don't know what gender it is or anything like that. But this is why you have this article. You have the hey, so this is a feminine. And at least you can narrow down the gender, because the gender is really important, because you have to find the, what's the word? Antecedent, when you're like pronouns, or if there's adjectives that we're going to be learning more adjectives. that are help qualify or define the nouns. So it's kind of helpful to know that. Hopefully that's right. Okay. Lastly, I'm using. I just want to do a quick overview of what a textual criticism is. I'm not expecting anyone here to know it, but we're just going to look at John 3:13. You want to look at it?
Yeah. In English?
Yeah. John 3:13. Do you have one where you can like switch into two different ones really fast?
Two different translations? I don't.
Oh. Okay. Well, can you read the?
I have the ESV on here.
Oh, ESV.
Oh, I can.
You have King James, or New King James? Or I'll read New King James, and you can read ESV.
Okay. That's John 3:13.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, yeah.
No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man.
Now do I have... Actually, I'll just do this. Look at that. I actually had him up here. Or he had it up here. So this is actually from my professor, Dr. Black. But you'll notice that what is in red is not in every translation. I forgot what RP stands for. Does it receive something? I don't know. No, raw. I forgot. Anyway, so you have ESV, and then you have New King James. New King James says, "No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man, who is in heaven." So he came down from heaven, and he's also in heaven. And you have to ask the question, is this original or not? Again, you have to remember that every translation is an interpretation. And one reason why it's an interpretation is because you have textual criticism also in play. And this is not to downgrade the authority of the Bible or anything like that. It's just that we don't have the original manuscripts, and so we're building off of many manuscripts, and they all don't necessarily go together or are equal. A lot of them are, but not all of them. And because there are differences, there are variants, and you have to figure out what is right, what is true, what is the one that we're going to base our authority on. And in doing so, well, they have this field of textual criticism, and I just want you all to be aware of it, mainly, not to know all these things, but just to be aware. And that you have to look at them kind of from a two standpoints. You have to look at the external, and then you have to look at the internal. So external will be things that surrounding it. So you have to look at all the other manuscripts that this verse is in. And look at not only the manuscripts, but maybe even church fathers or anyone who quotes it throughout history. And then internal would be, how does it seem like it fits within the context? So we'll just look at external. So whenever we're talking about manuscripts, they're usually broken down into primarily 3, sometimes 4. 4 when it comes to the gospel, because this one right here, Caesarean, is primarily just the Gospels. But you have the Byzantine, you have the Alexandrian, and you have the Western. If you were to picture Rome or Middle East, which I should have drew a picture, but you have kind of like you have Jerusalem right here, you have Egypt over here, here's the Nile River, and you have, this is the Mediterranean right here, and this is the little foot for Italy right here, blah, 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 right? So if we were to divide this up, Western would be in this area, Byzantine would be in this area over here, and then Alexandrian would be over here where Egypt is. Just to give you an idea. The reason why they classify them in families because they're geographically separated, and because they're geographically separated, there's similarities with these, there's similarities with these, and there's similarities with these, but they don't necessarily equal, even though they can. Does that make sense? Right? Any questions on that? Am I making that clear?
There's just groups of texts, manuscripts that came from each place.
Yeah.
Just to verify.
Yeah.
But they each have those slight differences, like in the slide before.
Yes, they all have different things as the slide before. But generally, Westerns usually agree with each other. Byzantines usually agree with each other, and Alexandrians usually agree with each other, generally. But not always. I mean, even right here, you have Alexandrian, and then here you have two different groups of Alexandrians that are disagreeing with one another. But just so we're all on the same page, we have the one who is in heaven, right here. Ha'on, which is a participle, the one who is in to hurano, which is in the heavens. We're in the heaven, actually, that's singular. The man who is in heaven. So, this is all the ones that have it in is number one. So the Byzantines primarily, all these right here, even some church fathers here, Chrysostom, whatever, all those people. Alexandrian, you have Origen and that. Western has all these. So all three families, which are in different geographical areas, and by the way, Caesarean would be, if I remember right, that would be kind of near where Israel's at, if I remember right. So all three families have this phrase, the one who is in heaven. Byzantine has nothing that shows that it's omitted, but the Alexandrians do. A lot of people, or scholars I would say, primarily hold to as the refer to the Alexandrian as the more conservative branch, and they usually rely more on what the Alexandrian text says. Primarily, not always, but primarily. The Western text is kind of the more progressive, more paraphrased. They kind of add stuff to it. But, yeah. And then the Byzantine, is the only reason why that's has a big influence is because there's a lot of them, and they are generally the same. But yeah, so you see the Alexandrian has these, and that's why most translations don't have the one who is in heaven, is because of the Alexandrian text. There's nothing in the Byzantine. There's a little bit in the Western, and there's a little bit in the Caesarean. But it doesn't just end there. We also have 3 and 4 right here. This would be the one who was in heaven. This is the one who was from. This is from heaven. So you can tell that these two texts right here are wrestling with something right here. The one who is in heaven. It's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Jesus came down from heaven, but he's also in heaven at the same time. So from an external standpoint, it seems as though that the external evidence is pointing to that the one who is in heaven is original. There's a lot of slides that I don't really know. I need to go through them all. Okay. So an early reading supported by the representatives from 2 or more text types is preferable to a reading supported by witnesses of a single text type. So in other words, because you have these families and more than 2 are agreeing with one another, he's basically saying that the words appear. So now we need to look at the internal evidence. We have to think it through as why would that be there? And generally, because we have multiple manuscripts, we need to ask the question is, so we have this one here, and we have this manuscript here, right here. This one, these 2 have it, but this one does not, okay? So we have to ask the question, why do we, which one is right? Is this one right, or is this one right? Right? So to do so, a lot of people have basically formulated a few questions. And generally, the first one that you think about is the one you prefer the more difficult reading. And the reason why is usually scribes who are copying would try to make it not so difficult. They would smooth it out, generally speaking. And it is much more difficult to assert that Jesus is in heaven while speaking to Nicodemus than to say that he was from heaven or he is from heaven. So that's something to think about. And the Metzger guy here, he said there is no discernible motive which would have prompted copyists to add the word, the one who is in heaven. And there's really no reason why to add it. The second thing is you want to prefer the one that is shorter. So if you have this text and this text, this one is really long, but this one is only 2 lines instead of 4 lines. Well, scribes usually like to add to make things clear. Well, obviously, we found out that the one who is in heaven is probably more difficult in this situation, and there's actually even exceptions to the shorter reading. Sometimes a scribe can just leave out things, or sometimes they intentionally leave it out for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons it could be is that this does not make sense, so let's take it out. This doesn't mean that they were being unfaithful, but it does mean that they were saying this doesn't fit with either their theology or it doesn't seem like it fits with the style of the letter, and so on and so forth. There's many reasons why they drop it out, and it's just what they do. So the possibility of an intentional omission, however, remains a viable option. Because it's a viable option, in other words, the scribe left it out, certain scribes may have found the expression either too difficult or objectionable for doctrinal reasons. So that's an idea behind that. Look here. So generally, there's a. So with that, we can probably end it right there. You can look at other style. This is more other things that we can look at, but primarily it's probably better to include the one who is in heaven in John 3:13. And it kind of helps you understand maybe John's perspective of maybe a Christological perspective. Here he is, he's writing a book about Christ, and he's talking to Nicodemus, but he's God, right? Maybe it's right to have the one who not only came from heaven, but who also is in heaven at the same time. So this is what Dr. Black says. This witness to Christ's deity on this reading of the evidence is thus not a mere handed down from the church, but a witness deriving from Jesus himself, from his own teaching about his person, and verified in the testimony of John the Apostle. His record is that the Son of Man, who has come from heaven, speaks truthfully about heavenly realities as a man may speak at his own home. For the incarnation could not denude heaven of the Son's presence. In other words, you can short it down as that can't really take heaven out of Christ because he's God. So you could say, even from both external and internal evidence, that it's probably best to conclude that the one who is in heaven. But I just want to say that when we come to the Bible, we have to realize that people who are making that translation are making a choice on how they're going to word it, what they're going to include. Should they include these textual variants or should they not? And even like we looked at last time at Hebrews 6:1, should we take the word to carry or bear as passive, being carried, or should we take it as middle, as striving? if you remember that. There's a lot of things to consider when translating, but as of now, I'm not really too concerned with you guys knowing textual criticism. I just want you to be aware of it and understanding that no English text is perfect, but they're still very reliable, 99.9% reliable, and that's still a comforting fact. So yeah, any questions?